Hello and welcome to another video on my channel. In this video I'm going to show you how we can use Java and Eclipse to create a simple application with a graphical interface to use our expression evaluation library to create to define some function with some variables and just show the results. So we have this is basically a simple drawing of what the GUI is going to look like. So we have a box for setting the name of the variable, we have a box for setting the value of the variable, we have a box for defining the function, and another box that shows the result whenever we hit this button calculate. And there's another button clear, then when we press it, it basically clears all the well, we can define it such that when we hit clear, it just clears all these 4 boxes. Okay, now as I mentioned before, in Java generally we have 2 options when we are developing graphical interfaces. One is using the Java Swing library, which is in the JavaX or Java extension package. Obviously we have other choices such as AWT, which no one uses anymore, and SWT, Standard Window Toolkit. Okay, but the good thing about Swing is just it's platform independent, but SWT is platform dependent. So if you want to develop a SWT application, you have to use the Java libraries for that specific operating system. But Swing is independent of the operating system. And Eclipse has a very nice plugin for developing Swing or SWT interfaces, which is called Window Builder. Now the second option, which is newer, is JavaFX, and you use another application which is not inside Eclipse, so it's an external application. It's called Scene Builder, and it uses the nice feature of JavaFX is that it supports CSS styling. So if you are familiar with web development and CSS sheets, then it's very easy for you to style all the objects in your interface the way you want them to be. Okay, so a little bit more details about Java Swing. So in Java Swing, the way it works is that you have this window, and it's called a JFrame. So the frame is basically your window, and then there is a content pane, which basically you can define a layout manager for it. So content pane is where you actually put all your content, these labels, these boxes, these buttons in the content pane. Okay, inside the content pane you can have multiple panels, J panels, to have separate functionalities. Okay, now for example, in this simple GUI we have these labels which are called JLabel. We have these text boxes. These are where the user can actually put something, write something. These are called the JText field. And then we have these buttons which are called JButton. Okay, now the way it works is that the way basically the user interacts with the GUI, the interface, is that so basically, let's say the user presses a button. This triggers an event. Okay, an event is basically something that implements an action interface. So basically, in order to handle the user events, you have to implement an action interface. Okay, and in order to do that, basically you assign action listeners to different items. So you assign an action listener to this button, and this action listener is triggered whenever an event is triggered. Okay, and there are different types of listeners, for example mouse listener, keyboard listener, this kind of stuff. And then you can define multiple functionalities. For example, you can define an action listener and set it to gets activated when some action is performed. Okay, and performing an action is in a simple way is just clicking a button, for example. Okay, so this is how you handle user events, user inputs. Okay, let's go ahead to Eclipse and try to implement this interface. Okay, now if you recall, we had this demo project based on Maven, and so far we have created some classes. So I'm going to create a new class, and it's going to be of type window builder, and I want to create a JFrame, and let's call it simple GUI. Simple GUI. Okay, and hit finish. Let's see what happened here. I think something is wrong with my Java versioning. Let's quickly go to the dependencies. Okay, yes. So the Java version was, I'm going to put this to 8 and update the Maven project so that it knows the Java is it's using Java 8. It previously was set to Java 9. Okay, yeah. So I usually put the interface and the code side by side. So first of all, if you have not installed the Window Builder plugin, go to Eclipse, go to the help, Eclipse Marketplace, and try to search for Window Builder Pro. Let's see, Window Builder. And I have already installed it. So you install Window Builder, okay, and then if you go to Eclipse Preferences, Window Builder, you can set some preferences. Typically what I do is what I prefer to do is in the code generation, I set the method name for new statement. I call it init GUI, so it just initializes GUI, and then the field, the variables, I always prefer to have them as a global field variable instead of local, because when you select local, it just puts all the variables inside the init GUI method. But I prefer to not to do that, have them as a global field, and then choose the actions when defining actions as a block method, okay? And all the field modifiers are private. Alright, so we create this GUI. Obviously it runs the swing applications on a different thread, and then in the simple GUI it just sets this GUI basically extends the JFrame, so extends the windowing. The default closing operation is exit on close, which basically terminates the JVM, Java Virtual Machine, and the content pane is the top level panel. So basically the frame is the entire window that includes these buttons that come basically from the operating system. And the content pane is basically our top level panel, okay? And it says the borders. Right now the borders are empty borders. These are not that important for us. So what do we want to do? We want to create a panel for user inputs, a panel for showing the results of the calculation, and having some area to have two buttons. So I'm going to create grid bag layout. This is my favorite layout. It creates a grid. See, it automatically adds them to the code. And then here I'm going to create a J panel and add it to the top. And for this J panel, I am going to add border, and I'm going to set it to title border and set the title user inputs. All right, so we have a user input section, and now I'm going to add another J panel, and again it has a border type of title border. I'm going to set results. Okay, now we have these two. I am going to add another J panel, in the content pane, another one, and what I'm going to do, I'm going to set the border again, title border, and here the actions. Let's call them actions. And in the user inputs, what I'm going to do, I'm going to add another grid bag, and then I'm going to add a J label. Okay, let's call it variable, and then I'm going to add a J text field, and then I'm going to add another J label right here. Let's call it value, and then I'm going to add another J text field right after that. Okay, and now I am going to add a J label for function, and as you probably can guess, I'm going to add a text field here for the function that the user defined. Okay, now what I'm going to choose here, I'm going to set it to not grow. Okay, so you automatically resize it. And what I want, so in the actions, again, I'm going to add a grid layout or grid bag layout, add a J button for let's say calculate, and add another J button for clear. Okay, so we have two buttons, and you can resize them the way you want. And if I set it to fill the block, it automatically fills the block. Let's call it to fill. Okay, or maybe make it bigger. We can make it bigger, but then I don't want this part also to grow, so it automatically resizes that. And okay, the only part that I want to grow is this one, and let's see, okay, now I'm going to also delete this row. Okay, all right, so let's save it so far, and let's see what happens. All right, everything looks great. So as you probably can see, it's super easy. We don't care about, you see the code is very large, but we don't really care about it. This window builder takes care of everything. And let's also add a text field area, J text area. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to add a J text area to the results, but where did it go? Let's delete it and add a basically J panel to the results, or maybe let's delete it again, a grid bag layout to the results, and then J text area. Okay, and let's see if it grows. Yes, so this is basically our GUI. and let's give these var field meaningful names. And here let's say value field, and then let's call this func field. Okay, and let's call it result field, and let's call it calc button, and let's call this clear button. Okay, all right, so it took us about 10 minutes to create a very nice and beautiful GUI. And now that have this GUI, what we need to do is we need to basically create the logic. So all this GUI, all the code goes into this init GUI block, and then in the constructor of this simple GUI class, it just calls the init GUI block. Okay? Okay. All right, so what do we want to do? So first of all, calculate, clear. So this clear button, if I want to add an action, I want to basically add an event handler. So right click, add event handler, and the type of event is going to be an action, because when the user clicks a button, it basically triggers an action, okay? And it's performing an action. So as you can see, what happens in the code is that in the button, it adds an action listener. As I mentioned, if you want to handle user inputs and monitor what's going on, you have to have some action listener, and it uses an anonymous class. Action listener is an interface, and you have to implement the action performed. And the action performed takes an argument of type action event. So event of type action, okay? Then the action performed for this clear button action performed, what I'm going to do is just saying that var field dot clear just set var field set text to null, to empty string, okay? And value field set text to empty, and func field set text to empty, and result field let's see if it has a clear method. No. So set text to empty. Okay. Now if I run this, now you see that I already ran it, but it doesn't show the window, the GUI, right? So the code is running, and the problem is that in Mac OS, Eclipse by default has in the argument, if you go to the run configurations, in the VM arguments, there is this check mark. Use the -x start on first thread argument when you're launching with SWT. And it also includes the swing, so you have to remove this check and run it again. Now it creates the GUI, okay? Let's see if the action for the clear works. How do we do that? Let's call this x 23 and func x squared. And in the result, let's write something. And what happens if we hit clear? Everything goes away. So the clear works, okay? Now the other thing, next we have to implement the logic for the calculate. Again, hitting this button calculate is basically handling an event, so we add event handler, and it's going to be an action that the user is performing, okay? And what we try to do here is, so we are going to basically, what we are going to do, we are going to get the var string expression. Expression is basically func field get text. Okay, and then var name is basically var field get text. Okay, and var value is basically value get text, and these are obviously have the type string, so string. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to call our expression evaluation library to evaluate this. But if for whatever reason the user the format of the input from the user is not correct, what we need to do, we need to if for whatever reason the expression evaluator cannot handle or cannot evaluate, it always throws an exception. So the best thing to do here is use a try catch, and in the try method double value is a new expression builder, and we pass in our x, and then we set variables are just var name. Okay, and then we build it to return an expression, and then we set variable and set the var name to var val, and then evaluate. Okay, so here we have to have a method. We have to have the method .evaluate. Okay, but then the problem is that this set variable complains, because it says, okay, var name is a string but var value is a string. And if you recall, we talked about the fact that we have in our math utils there is a evaluate, and we are going to assume that the user puts in the value box an expression which is numeric. Okay, now the last thing we need to do is basically get this value and show it on the result field. Set text value. Now it's complaining because value is number and it needs a double, so we add \n. So it needs a string, we add \n to set the value, go to the next line. Okay, all right, let's see if this works. All right, so we are here, we are going to put x 2.3 function x to the power of 2 and calculate 5.23, and it goes to the next line. So if I change it, set it again, 12.3, and if you recall, instead of using the parser method from the double class that parse a string to a double value, I use my math util and evaluate. The advantage of that is that I can use things such as pi in nodes. I can use some expressions such as pi/2. So if you pass this pi/2 as a string to the parser method, parse double in the double class, it throws an exception because it doesn't know what pi is or how to handle pi/2, right? It doesn't know how to handle this kind of expression. but the math utils that evaluate, it understands this. Let's say we have some star here. Now let's see what happens. It doesn't do anything because it runs into an exception, but just we can say e2 print stack trace. Now let's see what happens. So x pi sine of x over 2 should give us 1. It does, but let's say pi star. Yeah, it runs into the exception. And we are handle. If we didn't handle it, we didn't use try catch, it just terminates our program. Now the nice thing, you have to always have some sort of information for the user. So you can do something like a J option menu, or you can have something like a J option pane dot error message, for example. You can create a show confirm, show input dialog, show message dialog, for example. Show message dialog, okay? And the upper parent component is this, which is this JFrame window, and error is error in inputs. Okay? Now let's see what happens. So we put x pi sine of pi over x over 2. We are good. We have pi star. It gives us an error in inputs, an error message. Okay, let's say we fix this, and we put this here again, error in inputs. Calculate sine of x to the power of 2, 1, x4, 0.5, because sine of pi over 4 is 1 over square root of 2, times error. Now you can make it more and more fancier. For example, you can make it that when some error happens in one of these boxes, it automatically detects which box is the error and sets the text to red. Let's see how it works. So for example, let's say we said, okay, I'm going to show a message dialog, but I'm going to, let's say I'm going to assume that the error is in the value. Okay, so I'm going to value field dot set background, for example, and then color dot red. Let's see what happens when we do this. So x pi sine of pi over 2 pi over 4, or x over 4, correct, and let's say this, it sets it to red. Okay, now obviously you can see that what happens here is that first of all, the user can edit this number, which is not good. So we want to set this JText area to not being editable. So editable, we remove the tick here, and then we can also disable it. X pi and sine of x over 4. See, the user cannot interact with this box. This box is just for showing the results. Okay, and we have no inputs. It gives us the error, and yeah, this red box. All right, this was a very simple GUI, but it shows the power of Eclipse and this very nice window builder tool. We basically didn't write any code for the GUI. It creates all these tedious code for us. We just basically gave it the logic, and it's mostly just the actions that the user performs. Okay? Now the last thing I want to talk about, just in case you are interested, is the general principles for designing graphical interfaces and applications. And a very famous design approach is called the MVC ModelViewController, and it's very popular paradigm. And the way it works is that basically your software or your interface has three separate modules. One is the model. Basically this is your objects, your data structures, and the kind of computations you're going to do, right? And then the view. The view is purely your graphical interface, the buttons, what kind of controls to use, buttons, menus, this kind of stuff, what kind of actions are going to be performed. And then the controller is where you define the logic of the GUI, how the actions that the user inputs are related to the changes in the model. Okay? So the controller is what is gluing the model to the view. And in order to prevent your software from crashing, it's always the best practice is to make these as separate as possible from each other. Okay? So they shouldn't directly talk to each other. The other thing is that when you do this, if you want to save the state of your GUI application or software, you just have to save the model, because model is where all the information is, all the objects and the results are. And the next time that you run the software, you can regenerate the view, right? And then only load the model from the saved file into the view. Okay? So you don't need to do anything with the controller. You just have to save the models. That's the core and the information. That's one of the nice benefits of having separate items in terms of module, view, and controller. Alright, this video basically concludes our discussion of the mathematical expression evaluation in Java. And thank you for watching. Please share and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.